Over 3,000 years ago, guided by the revelation of God at the burning bush, Moses led his people to freedom across the Red Sea and into the wilderness of Mount Sinai. Here he left his people and climbed the mountain, where, amidst thunderclouds and lightning, he received the 10 Commandments. These events shaped the destiny of the Jews. Christians see them as a turning point in God's relationship to man. Muslims believe Sinai is the site of one of the great prophetic revelations, a place sacred to all. In the valley below, on the site of the burning bush, lives a community of Greek Orthodox monks, the monastery of the God-trodden mountain, the oldest surviving monastery in the world. While the monks remain in church for the Eucharist, a novice lets pilgrims in. The monastery was built like a fortress by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. For a long time, the only door in the massive granite walls was blocked, and visitors were hauled up by basket. These nuns from Greece and Romania bring symbols of devotion, incense, candles, and oil. The long morning services are over. The tasks of the day begin. Hermits settled near the burning bush as early as the 4th century. 200 years later, the monastery was built for their protection. The bush still survives behind the monastery church. Over its roots is the chapel of the burning bush. No one enters without first removing their shoes. In the words of the book of Exodus, "Moses, Moses, draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground." So God spoke from within the bush that burned but was not consumed.
Όσοι θα πήγατε πάνω στην Αγία Κορυφή και γυρίσατε από το δρόμο που είναι όλος σκάλες.
The monastery church is unique for the beauty of its icons. The word icon in Greek means image. Early Christian icons strive to portray the divine image revealed in the saints.
Σε ανάμνηση αυτού του γεγονότος έκτισαν αυτό το παρεκκλήσιο εκεί. Το ονόμασαν Παναγία Οικονόμησα από τους οικονόμους.
An icon is approached with a kiss of veneration for the holy person depicted. It is a means of personal relationship with Christ or the saints. This 6th century Christ is one of the great icons of the world. It uses no theatricality or mannerism to inspire emotion, yet through the extraordinary power of the eyes, one expressing concern, the other profound tranquility, the painter has introduced to us the supreme mystery of God incarnate, human and divine. The Christ and St. Peter are two of the earliest icons known, painted in the encaustic technique, mixing paint with wax. Such icons have survived only in Sinai. The light falls onto one side of their faces, leaving a shadow on the other. By the 14th century, the natural light and shadow of this world have gone, and the icon painter shows Christ as he would be seen at the end of time, in the uncreated light of the Holy Spirit. This powerful 8th century icon of St. Basil shows a change to linear and expressionist style. From the 7th to the 9th century, many icons were destroyed by wars, many more by imperial orders from Constantinople. Sinai, in the midst of Islam, escaped this iconoclasm. It is in reaction to Islam's denial of Christ's death and resurrection that this 8th century crucifixion shows, for the first time, Christ on the cross with eyes shut, stressing the reality of his death. A revival of culture culminated in the 10th century reign of an emperor in Constantinople, shown here as King Abgar receiving the cloth imprinted with Christ's face. It was the time of the conversion of the Slavs, when an icon like this, showing Jesus washing Peter's feet, would have served to teach the lessons of commitment and service. A jewel like St. Philip represents the peak of the revival. He stands blessed by Christ and in the direct light of eternity. Today, Father Paul works in the monastery gardens.
The monastery garden is a comfort to the monk. It's an adornment on this natural landscape, this desert. It's the best occupation. In the garden, the monk is not losing that simplicity and peace which is dear to him, because the trees, although each one of them can be seen as an entire factory, have been created by God to work secretly as man works within his own heart. When a monk is attending to the garden, he can pray at the same time and feel God very close to him and not lose that peace of soul. It is physically tiring, of course, but then a monk too should get tired.
Πρέπει να αποκτηθεί με πόνο. Η αγάπη λοιπόν ξεκινάει από το Θεό.
Love starts with God. It extends to us. It goes on to our fellow men. It embraces the whole of creation. As St. Isaac the Syrian says, it is when the heart burns for the whole of nature. It means one loves all creation, including the animals. We have seen many examples of holy ascetics who have fed wild animals and snakes even out of real love, a love that knows no bounds.
Μια αγάπη λοιπόν χωρίς όρια.
The monastery owes its survival partly to its remoteness and partly to the protection granted by both Christian and Muslim rulers, from modern statesmen to Muhammad himself. The Jabilia Bedouin have served the monks since the time of Justinian. Most of them have learned to speak Greek, and most of the monks have learned Arabic, the language which followed Greek as the main tongue of the Eastern Mediterranean. Alexander Dumas, visiting Sinai in the last century, wrote of the hospitality of the monks after the hardships of the desert. What touched us most was the fresh bread, real bread, such as we had not eaten for 14 days. Though delicious when first baked, the bread soon sets rock hard. But together with vegetables and fruit from the garden, it is the monks' staple food, particularly during the long periods of fasting.
Από τις πολλές δουλειές ούτε να φάω δεν μας πίνει, ούτε καφέ να πίνει.
Εγώ ως κεβοφύλακας της Ιεράς Μονής.
As the elected key holder of this holy monastery, I'm very much like a mother to the place, which as you see is like a small town inside its walls.
Τα κλειδιά τα οποία
The key holder is responsible for everything, checking the endless storerooms and safeguarding the treasures, amongst them the icons of Sinai. These are unique and so abundant because the dryness of the climate here has kept them in excellent condition.
Οι πατέρες με την αγάπη την οποία...
In the old days, the fathers with their love for pilgrims showed a great freedom, and that is why certain objects were stolen, as for instance the Codex Sinaiticus, one of the earliest manuscripts of the Bible. We are more careful now.
Το 1975...
In 1975, I noticed a small piece of parchment which led to the gradual discovery of over 1,000 manuscripts. The monastery was constructed in such a way that it is truly a labyrinth.
Η Ελέησον μας. Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ, Θεέ του Θεού, ελέησον μας. Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ, Θεέ του Θεού, ελέησον μας. Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ, Θεέ του Θεού,
In this maze of courtyards and alleyways is a small chapel dedicated to the 5 martyrs of Armenia.
Άγιοι του Θεού πλήρωσετε υπερημών, Άγια Μαρσέν, Άγια Στέν, Άγιο Άγιο, ορέστα και πάντες αγικητές τον Κύριο, η νέρεση διασέας ψυχή μου την ελευθερία. Οι μάρτυρες σου Κύριον διαθρής αυτών στεφάνους εκομίσεων σε αυτές.
The doors of the sanctuary are a 12th century masterpiece, an annunciation. Mary and Gabriel are young and beautiful. His message and her response are indicated by the slightest of gestures. In this icon of the same date, the angel moves in a mass of swirling drapery, and Mary is taken by surprise as she spins. This was no repetitive art, far less a dark age in the history of civilization. A 10th century icon of St. Nicholas, the protector of children and seamen, shows him with well-proportioned features. 2 centuries later, he has the deeply marked lines and powerful forehead of an ascetic. At times, 2 different styles are used even within the same work. The Archangel Michael saves a church from a river in flood. The anxious priest is shown as an emaciated ascetic. The archangel is in the classical tradition of beauty, the robes modeled to his graceful body. Christ's transfiguration was painted on a beam separating the sanctuary from the nave, a magnificent work from around 1200. It could only have been painted in Sinai. A feature of the monastery's icons are the rotating nimbuses round the heads of the saints. The gold flickers in candlelight, creating a luminous heavenly halo. This art displays a dramatic freedom of form and color. Perhaps in the isolation of the desert monastery, the monks and visiting painters felt less the constraints of the conventional world. Survival in the desert has always been hard. More than once, when famine struck, the monks came close to abandoning the monastery. According to their traditions, a miracle has often persuaded them to remain. Such miracles to which they owe their preservation are part of the story of Sinai. Isolation forced the monks to be self-sufficient. Travelers commented on their asceticism, severe even by monastic standards.
Έλα, Αχμέτ, έλα. Να φύγουμε, έχουμε δουλειές.
Once a month, the monks and Bedouin are given rations of supplies, such as soap, matches, coffee, tea, and sugar. There are about 20 monks in the monastery now, and novices continue to join. There are also monastic houses in Cairo and Crete. In the Middle Ages, 200 lived in Sinai, or as hermits in nearby caves. Since then, there have never been more than 40. Every monk has an allotted task, chosen according to each one's special knowledge or ability.
Another way in which the monastery contributes to some degree is education, and even assisting the poor people who live around. It also provides medical help to the Bedouin, who have worked with the monastery for so many centuries. The Arabs living around the monastery have lived with us for so long now that they have a special confidence in the monastery and find that beside the medicines, they will also receive a blessing, as they call it themselves.
At 3 o'clock, the bell rings for Vespers. All activity, except for worship, comes to an end.
Sinai is a holy place because of the events we know from the Old Testament, but also because of the saints who lived here. I often visit the place where St. John Climacus spent the greater part of 40 years. A monk's exile is not the result of hatred or contempt. It is the longing for God that compels him to become a stranger. In his isolation, he comes to know himself. Then he can begin the struggle for purification. Genuine humility is to place oneself lower than all creation. In effect, not to see a single person in the world as inferior. Dostoevsky says that monks are here to preserve the image of Christ so as to present it to the world, pure and unspoiled, when faith is lacking. The sure way to humility, as our fathers showed us, is obedience. A difficult thing, obedience, because the last thing a man will deny is his self and his own will. If a man is humble, how can he condemn anyone? A life without judging others brings profound peace to the soul. Here in this stillness, you can hear your own heartbeat. Of course, the heart has first to be filled with the presence of God, because man is a social creature. If God has not first seized hold of a man's heart, it's impossible for him to endure stillness.
Bika. Ya sibo tahat. Hada sibo tahat. Mamsi bi. Yes. كويس. اليوم
عمرو الصورة.
The cave of St. John Climacus is a blessed place, ideal for seclusion and silence. It was here he was praying when the miracle occurred with his disciple called Moses, who on a journey had fallen asleep under a huge rock. Moses heard a voice urging him to move. When he did so, the rock rolled over the spot where he had lain. Close to the cave is a small church, the chapel of St. John Climacus. Opposite this chapel, towards the east, one can clearly see Mount Sinai, where Moses received the law. When St. John prayed facing the east, he could just glimpse far away the peak of the holy mountain. Prayer is the most important task of a monk. It is the beginning and the end of a monk's life. In our tradition, unlike some others, consciousness does not ultimately fade away. On the contrary, it is strengthened and filled with light. St. John stressed that one's breath should be united with the thought of Christ. The Fathers devised a short form of prayer, the well-known Jesus prayer, the prayer of the heart, as we call it. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. What can one say about the power of this prayer, the joy it instills into the heart? Man in this world is often tired and under pressure. The Jesus prayer fills him with a sense of peace.
Κύριε ημών Ιησού Χριστέ, Υιέ του Θεού ελέησον το αμαρτωλό. Κύριε ημών Ιησού Χριστέ, Κύριε ημών Ιησού Χριστέ, Υιέ του Θεού. Κύριε ημών Ιησού Χριστέ, Υιέ του Θεού.
every morning. 2 novices follow the footsteps of monks and pilgrims from another age. They climb in silence through the rocky waste. These steps, built and cared for by the monks, lead from the monastery to the summit of Jebel Musa, Moses' mountain. It was here that he received the 10 Commandments. The Lord spoke unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh to his friend. Because of the story of Moses, hermits came to Jebel Musa. It was a sacred mountain, a place of revelation, where groups of them gathered, living in caves and building simple chapels in the hostile landscape. Many climbed to the summit to pray. In the 13th century, St. Gregory of Sinai climbed daily while he lived at a hermitage nearby. His writings and the work of his disciples spread the spiritual influence of Sinai to Orthodox lands as far away as Russia. Gregory lived in troubled times, yet he preached stillness. He was sold into slavery by Turkish pirates, ransomed by Christians in Syria. He became a monk at Sinai, then continued his travels from Crete to Bulgaria. He taught that a monk's way of life is a first stage, through the Jesus prayer to the attainment of Eshishir, a stillness, which, he wrote, is having only the activity of prayer going on in the heart, where it will warm the mind and inflame the soul with love of God and man. He who makes the ascent in the spirit toward God sees the entire creation luminous. A cypress tree and a well on the first even ground mark the approach to the cave, now a chapel, to which the prophet Elijah came in flight. He too heard God on the mountain, but to him God spoke not out of the thunder or earthquake, but in the whisper of a gentle breeze. These revelations on Jebel Musa foreshadow the ultimate revelation, the transfiguration of Christ. Elijah and Moses appear talking with Jesus when he led 3 disciples to a high mountain, and there his face shone like the sun. The 2 Old Testament figures flank Christ in the great 6th century mosaic above the sanctuary in the monastery church. Divine light radiates from his body, transfigured by the Holy Spirit. The disciples see his transfiguration, hear the voice of God, and fall to the ground in amazement. Around are the passionate faces of the prophets and apostles, and a dramatic head of John the Baptist, modeled on an ancient tragic mask. For 1,000 years, mosaic was amongst the greatest of Byzantine arts, and mosaic artists from Constantinople traveled the world. Their work at Sinai is amongst the finest of its kind. It bears witness to a belief central to the Orthodox tradition that the light of the Holy Spirit sanctifies men's bodies as well as their souls. For those who have worshipped here, Christ's transfiguration represents the hope for all creation and the goal of their own yearning for God. The earliest surviving record of a pilgrimage to Sinai by a Spanish noblewoman, Etheria, describes a very pretty garden which has plenty of excellent water. Below the sacred peak, in the scorched Sinai Peninsula, it had, by the 4th century, become one of the sites to be visited on any pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Sinai, in Egypt, was the hardest of all the holy places to reach, requiring at least 2 weeks' travel from Jerusalem or the Nile across perilous desert. Yet pilgrims came from all over the world. After weeks of hardship and danger, it is easy to imagine the elation they experienced on reaching the monastery, and the wonder they felt at its beauty. After the discovery of the body of St. Katherine, who was tortured at the wheel, the monastery was given the name of the holy martyr. In the 11th century, a monk from Sinai took part of her relics to France, and the monastery's fame spread in the West. This painting of St. Katherine came as a gift from Spain. Medieval crusaders left icons in a strongly Western style. Islamic rulers also paid respect, knowing that it contained a mosque within its walls. Peaceful coexistence is reflected in its collection of manuscripts. This Christian text is in Greek with notes in Arabic. An imperial gift from Constantinople of about 1000 AD has an ascetic monk, while Christ and evangelists are modeled on Greek philosophers. A later manuscript shows St. Gregory of Nazianzus writing his sermons. Scholars of the 19th century were drawn to texts rather than illuminations. The Codex Sinaiticus, one of the most important Bibles in the world, was stolen from the monastery in the 19th century. Bought from the Russians in 1934, it is now in the British Museum. It has played a vital role in the development of biblical scholarship since the middle of the last century. The monastery was also an object of interest to the traveller of romantic sensibility, eager to explore the Orient. A Scotsman, David Roberts, left a vivid impression of the place in his successful series of lithographs. Modern man no longer needs weeks on camelback to arrive humbled at this holy place.
Nein, nicht falsch. Sicherheitskontrolle.
Als Gott zu Moses sprach, brannte dieser Busch mit Feuer, aber nicht verzehrt ist. Dieser Busch ist ganz alt, aber lebt heute noch und blüht und gibt gelbe Blüte. Ja? As God spoke to Moses, burn this bush with fire, aber not consumed. But this bush is very old, but lives today and gives yellow flowers. Now we go on to visit the chapel of burning, the chapel of the monastery, but please, no photo in this chapel.
Tourism has placed a heavy strain on the monastic tradition of hospitality. Many stay in the expanding development being built where Moses camped with his people. Having survived all these centuries, never were the areas around the monastery in a greater need of protection. But pilgrims are always welcome. The old Romanian monk is recognized by a Greek priest from a visit years ago. He has come for Easter when the monastery is closed, except for those pilgrims staying for Holy Week.
Κοινωνούς επίτο της ευφροσύνης, προμηνύοντας την ενδόξον διασταυρούν και σωτηρίων
The daily cycle is broken by the great feast. The feast of feasts in the Orthodox Church is Easter, the culmination of 40 days of severe fasting. In the long services of Holy Week, Christ's last days on earth are relived. On Good Friday, his burial procession. The sorrow of Good Friday gives way to joy at the midnight service on Saturday, as the news is proclaimed, Christ is risen, Christos anesti. On Sunday morning, they celebrate the Vespers of Love. The priests are robed before the people who witness their transformation from ordinary men to the celebrants of God.
On this Easter morning, we celebrate the Vespers of love. The robing of the priests reflects the happiness and glory of heaven. As Archbishop, I wear this robe, which has been embroidered many years ago with joyful colors. Heavy are the holy garments. Heavy also are my duties as abbot. There is in this place a message, a call for modern man to turn inwardly towards the heart and upward to God. A message of internal and external peace, so appropriate coming from this troubled part of the earth.
Αναστάσεις από το τάφιο των πρίπτων και μη την όνιωσή και μεγαέλεον. Αναστάσεις
δόξα τη Αγία αυτού τριμέρου εγέρσεως. Χριστός Ανέστη.
The Bedouin too celebrate with Easter eggs and bread. The tribal chiefs join in. It is a festive occasion for the whole community at Sinai.
όπου εγώ προσφέρω εις δόξαν του Αγίου σου ονόματος, εις σωτηρίαν της αμαρτωλής μου ψυχής και τούτου μου του ακροατηρίου. Εμφάνει την ο ερός να μας εφράνεις με το φως της ενδόξου Αναστάσεως και αν έβριστα καθλισμένα στας καρδίας μας, πέρασε όμως εκεί μέσα καθώς επέρασες και κλεισμένων των θυρών προς τους μαθητάς σου και έμπνευσον εκεί μέσα την χάρη του Αγίου σου Πνεύματος και της Θείας σου ειρήνης, είπε άλλη μίαν φοράν προς εμάς, λάβετε Πνεύμα Άγιο, ειρήνη ημίν.
Ο
Το οστεοφυλάκιο,
In this ossuary are kept the bones of the fathers who have fallen asleep, awaiting altogether the general resurrection. Well-known saints have lived here, but many unknown also. The world never learnt of them. God has inscribed them in the book of life.
οσίων Αγίων αγνώστων.
Χριστός ανέστη εκρός, θάνατο, θάνατο πατήσας, και της εκκλησίας ζωή χαρίσα με